seats.
There are seats.
Sir? There are seats down, sorry. There are seats down here.
There's seats here, and then 2 seats over here. The seats right here.
There's 2 over here. There are 2 here. Sorry, you can't stand here. The projections will come out and hurt the door.
Okay, all right. I got my order. First of all, I want to say on behalf of the cinema and everybody who works there, how honored we are to have all you guys and women here tonight to deal with an issue that is just so horrific. And it's not horrific enough in many people's lives. And that we hope that one of the things that come out of this meeting will be a greater awareness and a greater outreach. And so, if in the future you have need for a place to meet those people who are on the island, everybody else uses this for a meeting place, so why shouldn't you? And so that's an open invitation. All you have to do is let us know you're coming, when, and we'll set a space up, okay? And, I think also this is, before we start, an appropriate time to thank Stuart and Ginger Post. They are, I guess, I hate to use the word angry, but they really make it possible for the cinema to do these programs without getting kiboshed. I mean, so that we can do more of them and not worry about how do we pay for it when somebody really helps you as much as they do. And I think they really deserve whatever. They don't need the applause, but I think they, well.
I want to thank, is Megan here? Oh, Megan. I want to thank our co-presenter tonight, Megan O'Hanley from the Long Island Alliance for Peaceful Alternatives. Who organized and set up this whole program. Thank you, Marty. Okay, so I think, does anybody else we've left out who we have to thank? Please stand up now. Okay. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay. I'd like to just tell you who's going to be on this great program before we begin with our introduction. Dr. Michael DiNcenzo is going to be our speaker following the and also Peter Brunson, who is now president of the NYC chapter of Veterans for Peace and leading the fight to prevent the closing of VA hospitals. I think there's somebody who is not here, but Morty said that he would be speaking tonight, is Jose Vasquez from the Iraq Veterans Against the War. Is Jose here?
No, he's not here tonight. He couldn't make it. He tried.
He tried. Okay. So the other, well, I think now we're ready to begin. And now I'd like to introduce Dave Klein, who has a long list. I've heard Dave on VAI, so I was just so happy that he was here to speak tonight. And he served in the infantry in Vietnam, was wounded and became disabled. I'm going to just do this small background. And is currently president of Veterans for Peace and coordinator of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. So now I introduce Dave Klein.
I know you're here to see a movie, not to hear a speech, so I'm going to keep this brief. You know, there's a lot of Vietnam veterans in the audience tonight, significant number here. And when the war in Vietnam ended in 1975, or at least the killing ended in 75, that's 31 years ago. And many of us, after having stood up, fought in the war, and then fought against the war, said, let's hope that this country learns something. But, you know, what we learned, or what those in power learned, was how to confuse people and rewrite history. So that what used to be known, what used to be called black became white, and what used to be white became black. It was a rewriting of history to confuse and mislead the people, to take us through another cycle, and now we're right back in the same place in Iraq today instead of in Vietnam. And the only thing that they learned was how to confuse the American public and dumb them down as much as possible. So this movie was made to try and bring back that real history. Now, I know the guy who made this film since 1970, because after I got out of the Army, I worked at a GI coffee house down in Fort Hood, Texas, and he became a part of that staff. And he called me up about a year and a half ago talking about the idea of making this film, and we talked it out and came up with some ideas. And he's turned this into a really powerful documentary. And Michael Moore, with his film Fahrenheit 451, cut new ground for documentaries as a commercial effort that reaches out to a broad number of people. You know, part of the problem today is anybody can buy a video camera, a camcorder, so everybody thinks they're a filmmaker. And so you get films that are sometimes good, sometimes bad, sometimes they're not much better than a home movie, you know? But this is a professionally produced film. He runs a company, Dave Zeiger runs a company called Displaced Films. And he's been rolling this film out in theaters. It opened in San Francisco. Well, actually, initially it was played, an early edition of it was played on TV in several European countries. But it opened in the United States commercially in San Francisco several weeks ago. It ran for 3 weeks, then a week later it opened in New York, where it ran for 3 weeks down at the IFC Cinema, which is the old Waverly down on 6th Avenue. It opened in Atlanta last weekend. It's running in 4 theaters in LA right now, and it's beginning to open in a number of places. Now, different cities, the amount of time that it runs in a theater varies. Like New York City, 3 weeks was a pretty impressive run. In the New York Times, when it opened, the New York Times on the front page of their art section wrote a very positive review. Village Voice wrote a good review. Even that free handout, PM, had an article, Dissenters Are Patriots Too, which gave it a positive review. I think the only film paper that gave it a negative review was the New York Post, and that shouldn't surprise anyone because Murdoch owns it. But this movie tries to set history straight again. You will not hear the word Iraq one time in this movie. But if you don't hear the word Iraq in your head, then you're not awake. So, without any further ado, I think we should go to the movie. Afterwards, there will be several speakers and a question and answer period and discussion, so I hope you're all willing to stay for that. And let it roll.
A new phenomenon has cropped up at several Army bases these days, a so-called underground GI press, which consists largely of anti-war newspapers. Military authorities are clamping down hard on the papers.
Fort Knox, Kentucky, Travel and Adventure, Fort Gordon, Georgia, The Last Harass, Washington, Fort Benning, Georgia, Chanute Air Force Base, Four-Year Bummer, Fort Dix, New Jersey, Shakedown, Fort Hood, Texas. Fatigue Press is published by a group of radical soldiers stationed at this Army base.
And we used to distribute it clandestinely on base. We'd go around and leave bunches of them in barracks. We'd go through barracks at night and leave them on foot lockers. And if you were caught distributing literature on base, that was a court-martial offense.
Despite the military's best efforts, the underground press became the lifeblood of the GI movement, as the Army's own recruiting slogan, fun, travel, and adventure, turned into the popular GI expression, fuck the Army.
There must have been close to 300 anti-war newspapers written, produced, and published on bases all throughout the world. It was wherever there were GIs, American GIs in the world.
We got together a number of times and talked about how we were going to organize active duty GIs to go to the peace demonstration. And then I remember also hearing about the B-52 bombers that were dropping leaflets on Vietnam, urging the Vietnamese to defect. And I thought, well, if they can do it overseas, then we can hire a small private plane, load it up with leaflets, and drop the leaflets on military bases in the San Francisco Bay Area. Thousands and thousands of leaflets. At one point, I know we were a little concerned about getting shot down, but nothing happened. Evidently, they landed pretty accurately. That's what they testified at the court-martial.
I grew up believing that if our flag was flying over a battlefield, that we were on the side of the angels. My father fought in the Second World War. He won awards and medals, and, you know, I grew up during the good wars.
Mr. President, there's a terrible demonstration going on outside.
Oh, there's always a demonstration going on outside, Pat.
Yeah, but Richard, this one is completely out of control.
What are they asking for this time?
Free Angela Davis and all political prisoners, out of Vietnam now, and draft all government officials.
Well, we have people to take care of that. They'll do their job, you do your job, and I'll do my job.
Richard, you don't understand. They're storming the White House.
Oh, in that case, I better call out the 3rd Marines.
You can't, Richard.
Why not?
It is the 3rd Marines.
Oh.
What if we put together an anti-war show that's, you know, the opposite side of the coin from the Bob Hope show?
I went down to that base, they took one look at my face and read out an order to bar me. I said, Foxtrot, Tango, Alpha, free the Army.
F the Army. We always said free the Army, or fun, travel, and adventure, but it really meant the Army.
I think the most startling thing to me occurred, however, as the court-martial began. What would happen was we would walk from the parking lot to the building where the court-martial was being held, and it was the most remarkable thing when hundreds of GIs would hang out of windows, out of the barracks, and give me the V sign or give me the clenched fist. This was mind-boggling to me. This was a revelation. And at that point, it really became crystal clear to me that something had changed here and that something very, very important was happening.
And with soldiers beginning to question the war in the wake of the Tet Offensive, thousands began going AWOL, or absent without leave. Many found their way to San Francisco, where a series of events brought the emerging GI anti-war movement onto the national stage.
Have you given much thought to the penalty of being AWOL?
Yes.
Can we see your change, please?
We joined together in July 1968.
We took sanctuary in a church and chained ourselves to ministers. We essentially called the press and said to them, we're not going to Vietnam. We're refusing our orders, and in fact, we're resigning from the military. Come and get us.
They had nothing to lose. And it had no idea what was going to come. And that's a free place. It's a really free place, you know. You don't know what's going to happen, you know where you're going, but you know what you're doing.
And that was my introduction to the San Francisco Presidio Stockade.
For 19-year-old Private Michael Bunch, life in the Army had been little more than a series of AWOL violations. His last stop was here, the Presidio Stockade, where he was fatally shot last Friday while trying to escape from a work detail.
So we reacted viscerally and with anger and disgust and outrage. And then things started to calm down because we started to plan. we came to a decision that the best thing we could do was to have some kind of a demonstration.
At a certain point, Commandant came out and read us the Mutiny Act, and we just kept singing louder and kind of linked arms and sing and sing.
We were scared, man. I'll tell you, we were really scared. But we had them right where we want them. They were finally listening to us, man. That's the first time I can ever remember anybody listening to us while I was in the military.
The commanding general of the 6th Army, which was the jurisdiction, and he said that they thought that the revolution was about to start and that they really had to set an example, come down hard, and we were the guys that they decided to do that with. And they did. I mean, we were on trial for our life. I kind of came in as an AWOL, and within 2 days of hitting the stockade, I was facing the death sentence for singing "We Shall Overcome."
How did you come to the decision to desert?
You know, when you're laying on your back and you can't move for day in and day out, you have a lot of time to think. So you think about what you did, what you've done, things that you've gone through, the people that you've killed, the people that have died.
Then you actually see what I saw, what was going on in the States. Dudes are running down the streets and wearing the same kind of uniform that I got. They're in Memphis. They're beating up on people. Wait a minute, we're over here beating up on people over here, and you're beating up on black people. Dogs are running everywhere. Tanks are on the streets.
This was Armed Forces Day, and in many cities across the country, there were the usual parades, displays, and bands. But the recent surge of protest over the war in Indochina cast a shadow over today's activities. This was even true at some military bases where the presence of anti-war demonstrators led to the cancellation of planned observances.
1,000 GIs marched the first year right outside the base. And they told people it was off limits, and they told people that if you went there, you were going to get arrested. The store owners downtown were putting up plywood coverings on their windows because the cops told them it was going to turn into a riot. But then people decided to change it to Armed Forces Day because, we thought making fun of your enemy was as valuable as yelling at them. The second year, 1971, it had to be 3,000 to 4,000 out in the streets.
I read that you took a stand and refused to kill in Vietnam. You said no man was your enemy, if what he's fighting for is to be free. But soldier, we love you. Yeah, soldier, we love you. Standing strong, 'cause it's hard to do what you know you must do, 'cause it's true. Yes, it's true. They locked you up in their stockades. Yeah, they locked you up 'cause they're afraid that you would rap and spread the word. But you can't jail truth, it will be heard. Oh, ain't it hard to smile sometimes?
In April of 1971, thousands of Vietnam veterans against the war converged on Washington, D.C. and threw their medals onto the Capitol steps.
We don't want to fight anymore, but if we have to fight again, it'll be to take these steps.
Michael Kenzo, please. Pete Brunson. Pete. Here we go. Michael is professor of history at the, this is long, the Henry H. Watkins Distinguished Teaching Professor for the study of nonviolent social change at Hofstra. Hofstra's a tough place because they have a lot of social work. It's a terrible way to run it.
Oh, is this okay?
I just want to thank everybody for coming, and it's a very special night for us because I think tonight we've organized the Suffolk chapter of Veterans for Peace, and we're very happy about that.
Thank you. I'll take questions from the floor. And do you want to talk first? How do you want to do this? I want to take some questions. No? Yes.
I'd like to ask if there are any clergy here, why are their friends and mates so quiet about this war? All I read about is, in this moral issue about the silence of the clergy, and it's deafening. Why don't we get angry and make our clergymen speak out against this damn war?
We need some more William Sloane Coffins and others, and Martin Luther King. When King got the Nobel Peace Prize, he said it wasn't enough to work for racial justice. You had to focus on the triple evils that he said were interrelated: racism, poverty, and war, and felt that the Nobel Peace Prize gave him a special responsibility to make that advocacy. But I think, Bert, while it would be nice to have the clergy out front, it's great to have David and the other veterans for peace who've taken these initiatives as part of it. And I think, one of the questions that comes out for all of us who are concerned about peace and justice, and the Vulcans who still run our government and act in our name. And I think, in a way, at what point you get mad and stay enraged. So an aroused public is just not going to stand for people making decisions in our name that are inappropriate. And I would just say that there's a model for this. In the 1980s, groups around the country and on Long Island Alliance for Peaceful Alternatives, I think networking is really important, try to do things. United Campuses to Prevent Nuclear War, I was a national chairman. We had 600 chapters. Physicians for Social Responsibility, International Physicians to Prevent Nuclear War. We won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1986 by networking around the globe, literally, and got Reagan to change his policy on nuclear fighting. So, I think your question is, how do you get people to bear witness? And then how do you build networks and coalitions? And I think these men have already started it, and a lot of us can join up with them.
I would like to also add, right now there's an organization called Clergy and Laity Concerned About Iraq, which United for Peace and Justice Coalition has helped get going, and there's a guy named Reverend Sekou who works up at their office, and they've been trying to promote this effort. Just recently on the anniversary of the invasion, of the third anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, we held a Veterans and Survivors March from Mobile, Alabama to New Orleans to try and link the war abroad with the social consequences at home, because what's going on down on the Gulf Coast is criminal. This long after, it's still a mess. And a lot of the places we went to were black churches that's hosted us for activities. And we were at a church in Biloxi, and there was all the ministers from the town were there, and they did a service, and they had singing, and this and that, and some of us spoke. And when we spoke, and they were focusing pretty much on the effects of the after effects of Katrina and how it's affected their community. And when we came in there, we started jamming them up about how that the two things are connected, that this is not one thing separate from another, but the two are interconnected, the war abroad and the war at home. And the main minister came up to me after the program and he said, we were talking about this, the ministers, and we're going to start promoting that message now, that they hadn't put the two and two together or they were afraid to put two and two together because they thought, oh, maybe we'll offend the government, we need relief aid. But when we posed it to them, and especially when I spoke, I posed it to them like this is not just a practical question, this is a moral question, and what are you about? And I think that sometimes we have to confront people with that, reawaken the morality of some of our religious leaders today.
Yeah, we have a question back here.
I actually have an answer, not a question. I was over there from 67 to 68 as a surgeon, and 2 or 3 of us would storm down to the Americal Division and protest what we were doing over there, and we were all constantly intimidated with, by being threatened with court-martials, as were the clergy if we complained. And so I took another tack and I wrote to the New York Times, the 2 Buffalo newspapers, and the 2 Cleveland newspapers, including things about like the Eli massacre, and told them I even had photographs to go with the facts that I wrote them, and they would not publish them. They told me that I would be court-martialed, they would be in trouble with the government, and I could bring all that material in and bring my letter back when the war was over, and then they would consider publishing it. So that's part of the reason why both the physicians and the clergy did not speak out more than they did over there.
You know, there's an excellent point in that. I think that there's a lot of responsibility spread around, not just clergy or others speaking out. And part of it, what you allude to, is the media. You know, there's a lot of cowardice in the media, one-shot journalism. Even when something gets in that's accurate, if it appears one day, rather than being sustained over a period of time, it's hard to keep a focus on what's going on. To say nothing of not just the leaders in office, Democratic presidents like Johnson and Nixon and, of course, George W. Bush, but where's Congress in all of this? I mean, where's the Democratic opposition? A majority of Democrats did vote against the resolution to authorize Bush to go to war in October of 2002, but they're too cowardly to discuss it. And the main leaders like Kerry, who's not included in this film because the filmmaker was so embarrassed about what he did in the 2004 election that he felt he kind of went against the good principles he'd shown with the Winter Soldiers protest.
There's a question back here.
First of all, I think this film was fantastic because it shows that the war can be stopped by the soldiers and sailors who are forced to fight this war. I want to give you an incident of what happened during World War. I'm a veteran of World War II. And after World War II, after the peace in August, the military wanted to keep all the troops on the bases for as long as they possibly could. And there was a wave of demonstrations all over the world, including Hickam Field in Hawaii, in the Philippines, Germany, Italy, Alaska, everywhere. At the time, I was on a ship, an LST that had been scheduled to bring arms, bombs and everything to possibility of invading Japan. When, at the time, I was in Port Chicago, California, loading ammunition. Port Chicago, in August of 1944, exploded. Some 400 GIs, sailors, mostly black, were killed. 100 that were left decided they weren't going to go back to the Port Chicago depot. Anyway, when the war ended, we were sent to the Oakland shipyard to reconvert to a troop carrier. We sailed for Hawaii in October of 1945. I had friends at Hickam Field, and I went to visit my friend at Hickam Field, and there were thousands of GIs with picket signs on the field demanding to go home, because at the time the military was lax. What I'm trying to say is that only the force of the people who are doing the fighting can stop this war. And I think the more we talk about how GIs, how soldiers can take things into their own hands to stop the bloodshed, I think only then can we put an end to this war and future wars. Thank you.
Well, let me just say, well, I think that the role of the military is important, and the ability or inability of the military to continue fighting is important. It's a responsibility of every American citizen to work against this war. So I don't believe that brother was saying, you guys are off the hook now. Now, I do want to tell you that this movie will be available on July 15th on DVD, available through the website sirnosir.com. July 15th it will be available, and then in the fall it's going to be released in a double CD package with extra footage that'll be sold commercially in stores. But one of the awards that Dave Zeiger won at one of the film festivals, you know, when you get an award, they give you money or a gift or something. One of the things they did for him was make 1,000 copies of this on DVD. And through Iraq Veterans Against the War, we are currently distributing those 1,000 DVDs free to active duty military personnel, especially in Iraq. So if you know anyone in the military, you can get a copy and ship it to them, because we think, just like the brother was talking about so much of our history that we don't know, the bonus march, to bring them home movement. Right. You know, this is another piece of that, you know, and there's power in the veterans movement, and that truth has to be recognized, told, and recognized, and the record set straight.
I just want to comment on that. One of our projects in the New York City chapter, and I think it's the first time it's been done since the Vietnam War, we go out to armories in the metropolitan area. We have somebody in the inside who tells us when the drills are going to schedule. And a group of us, Iraq vets and a group of vets for peace, about a dozen at a time, 5 in the morning, 7 at night, whenever these drills are scheduled, we go out there and we meet the National Guardsmen and Reserve people as they come in, and we hand them a card. It identifies who we are. We tell them we're veterans, and we offer to help them with some of their problems, like stop loss and some of the other things, DU poisoning, testing for DU poisoning, and other issues like that. So we are beginning now, and that's a project that the new chapter may consider here, to reach out to active duty people locally the best way we can. And it's also important because that was one of the components that was missing in New Orleans, that the National Guard that should have been protecting them was over in Iraq, and that's something they missed.
Yeah, there's a question.
Yes, I'd like to thank you for a wonderful and important film, for the cinema, for allowing it to be shown here. I've been trying to understand the lack of opposition to the war, and then I think back to, I was drafted in 1968, and my family was somewhat indifferent about the Vietnam War until I got drafted. And then suddenly they were anti-war and real concerned. And I'm just wondering, I guess my question really is, were there a draft today, or would there be a draft today? Would it be more equitable? Would that, if my daughter, I don't have a son, but if my daughter was being drafted, maybe I'd be out there screaming and hollering, and would that have made a difference with this situation today? Were there a draft? You know, would there be more opposition to the war if our sons and daughters were being drafted, is my question.
I think people tend to underestimate. Right now, reports are that 72% of the American people are against the war in Iraq. We do 4 vigils a week, one at Rockefeller Center with the grandmothers who recently got released after they were busted for demonstrating at a recruiting center. And we do one in Forest Hills, Queens on Saturday, another one in Flushing. And the people that pass us by on the street thank us for what we're doing. The largest response is positive. Only a few of the tourists coming by who have negative responses, but most people, we've met people from foreign countries, and the grandmothers who were convicted were invited to Germany. They had their trip paid for, and 3 of them went over and were brought over to Germany to talk about it. We get letters, emails from Japan, people who've seen us at Rockefeller Center and have started their own groups over there. So it isn't that dismal, but we have more work to do.
I think you know, Pete is right, there's a huge opposition now. If there's a draft, there'd be more so. There's more opposition to the war in Iraq now than there was to Vietnam in 1968, which was the first year that the majority of Americans opposed the war. And I want to refer all of you to a article in the American Prospect for October of 2004. And the article is about, the takeout is, America is not split over the Vietnam War, but Karl Rove needs you to believe that it is. And you get the so-called swift boat veterans for truth, really for liars, popularized by Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and the far-right echo chamber. And I think what comes out of here is, you know, why didn't we know about the GI movement? Why didn't more people know about it? And how do we get the Rambo version of the war? If you read this article, the American people have been opposed to the Vietnam War from 1968 down to the present. Even after 9/11, when there's a slight erosion in support of government militarism, the people have been there. So the question is, how do we deal with the Vulcans? And I want to recommend to all of you James Mann's book, The Rise of the Vulcans, in which he says George W. Bush knew zero about foreign affairs. Once he chose Dick Cheney, he was choosing militarism, because Cheney's closest buddy was Rumsfeld, and along with Wolfowitz, they were going to go to war in Iraq way before 9/11. The Wall Street Journal praises this book because it liked the robust military projection of America's might more than anything else, and they should be held accountable. And they haven't been held accountable. You know, there should be hearings on these guys for lying, for distorting, for incompetence, and more. And the Democrats have been woeful in not pushing for more of it.
I would like to speak specifically to the question that was raised regarding the draft. Among our ranks, there's differences of opinion on this. I was drafted, and I consider military draft to be involuntary servitude. I also have a 20-year-old son who would be subject to a draft, and I don't want to see him being forced into involuntary servitude. And I think it's important to recognize that the military draft drives recruitment. You know, like the idea that, you know, like I think there's some somewhat false views about the draft. The draft actually compels a lot of people to join because they figure if I don't get drafted, I'll get a better job in the military, so I'll join as opposed to getting sent over as cannon fodder. And right now, we don't have a draft. What we have is an economic draft. Yeah. So, like, what you have driving the military recruitment is people who are trying to make a better life and have no options or very little options, and recruiters try and BS you. The problem with that is that certain communities and certain groups are affected and other groups are totally immune to it. That's why you don't see as much protest on campuses today as you saw during the Vietnam War. I'll be honest with you, that is a fact. But among veterans, among our ranks and the veterans, there's like two different opinions on it. I express my views, other guys would argue we should promote the draft. I mean, there were several politicians that were promoting. Charles Rangel was promoting that. You know, so that's a contentious issue in our ranks, and something we'll probably argue about. But I believe that the United States government and the Pentagon is deadly afraid of instituting a draft because they see it would increase popular discontent. And even though there is a 70% opposition to the war, 70% of the people ain't out in the streets, and that's what they're worried about. Now we have to mobilize on all fronts, in the elections, and in the streets, and in all kinds of actions, but, so I hope that answers it. It's not a settled question, but that's, I think, the dynamics at play.
I'd like to just mention,
you might listen, you can't hear you in the back, and wait for a microphone, okay?
Of young kids.
Just wait your turn, sir. Just wait your turn, okay?
I'd like to just mention that Winter Soldier was shown here last year,
Why don't you talk into the mic?
which was very powerful. And that DVD is going to be available at the end of this month. Winter Soldier, when I think it was 140 or 145 Vietnam veterans spoke out. The other thing is this coming Sunday, the 21st of May, on Showtime, they're going to show Baghdad ER, which is a documentary that was made in the Green Zone. And Bob Herbert, who writes in the New York Times, said every American should see this documentary. And it shows just the raw horrors of war, and you see our soldiers coming in begging not to take off their legs or arms and saying, "It's the worst thing I've ever seen, sir." "What is it? What happened?" Said, "My buddy's face was blown off." So Amy Goodman played part of this the other day. Randy Rhodes covered it on Air America, and I think everyone should see it if they can.
It's on HBO, not on Showtime, I believe.
I'm sorry, well.
And even though everyone should see it, the military is trying to suppress that movie right now.
And just a quick thing, on Winter Soldier, I think was done in '71 at a 3-day conference in Detroit, and that a taping of it's been reissued, I think, last year. But there's a whole context, I think, of films here that make these points. About 2 years ago in this room, we showed Fog of War. And, you know, McNamara, 25 years after the Vietnam War, wrote in retrospect, in which he said we were wrong, we were terribly, terribly wrong. Now James Wilkerson, Colin Powell's chief of staff, is saying Powell was terribly wrong to go along and not speak out in criticism. And last week I met William Howard Taft IV in Ohio, who was the general counsel for the State Department, who resigned because he disagreed with Gonzales and with Bush on military tribunals and disregarding the Geneva Accord, and his great-great-grandfather was the President of the United States following Theodore Roosevelt. We need more public resignations with courage.
Let's take one more question, okay?
Yeah, it's just, I luckily never had to go to the army, so I'm not against it. It's just relevant to the psychology of human beings. I did read an article about a young man's personal trip towards Vietnam. But he went upstate New York, wondering should he run away to Canada, should he go? And after a month or so of deliberation, he decided that he was going to go. And he said that he took the coward's way out. To go to Vietnam was taking the coward's way out. And I think that the ones who started initially showed an amazing amount of psychological courage in the face of such without the support. But the ones who at the end of this program, at the end of it, who were against the war in Vietnam, it was easy for them, much easier when there's all this moral support for being against a war. So when we speak about the soldiers not doing it, it's up to us to create that psychological support for the soldiers to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do this. And that's the job that we have to do, creating the psychological support to allow, because we're all weak. And as you get it in Psychology 101, when the people will torture a person strapped down, as long as a person in a white coat tells them, people are very weak, and we have to just create that psychological background for soldiers to be able to say no.
Let's get one more right here, and that'll be it.
Hello, my name is Drew Mealy. I'm part of Military Family Speak Out, and I would just like to speak to the gentleman that was voiced some concern about if his daughter was in the service, if that would make a difference. Well, my daughter did go to Iraq, and I'm here to tell you that I have some information and some applications for anybody that has anybody in the service, if they want to partake in some kind of action or to do something, that I have my phone number and everything right here, and it does make a difference. You know, I know everybody here, it makes tremendous difference the way you look at it when somebody in your family, and from there, you look at it the way the Iraqi families look at it, and everybody in this world looks at it.
That's right.
One more.
But you can, right, I got it. Wait a second, do you mind? I just want to tell everybody, you can continue talking. We're going to go in, there's a reception in the Sky Room, so you don't have to stop talking, and those people who didn't get their questions out, you're going to hang around for a little bit so we can talk to you guys?
Should you really actually be trying to push towards that, so that would actually get people out to speak? I try to deal with my son and his friend, but I've been with all the demonstrations in the city. They come to see all the movies. Oh, they go to see all the movies, they see all the movies, they've seen the book, they listen to Air American Radio, and they're so completely frustrated by the nonviolent protests, where they take you and they turn you into little pens, where they'll change the route where you want to go, or they'll watch you around the garden. And to them, it's like just like so frustrating when they see on the television and news in other countries that when they see in France or in Nepal and they see these violent protests, they feel that some action is actually done by that. Whereas here, they say that it's, you know, I mean, it's a nice thing that you can get out and march around, but like you say, I mean, you can see these vultures, but nothing really changes with them. They're all still in power.
I think the question is, you know, how do you reach a tipping point where you really begin to make a difference? I've been in those rallies in New York where you're right, it's literally like being in a pen like a cattle. You can't even get out in the side streets because the police won't let you out of the line. But look at what happened with the raging grannies from their 70s to the 90s who sat in New York City and got arrested and came into court and were willing to go to jail. I mean, that made page one of the New York Times 3 days in a row. And, you know, here we had a bunch of elders saying we're going to stand up and bear witness. I think we need to operate at several levels, including putting more pressure on politically. Whenever I get any mail from Hillary Clinton, I send it back in her self-addressed stamped envelope and say, what's your plan for the war in Iraq and how to get us out of there? Because she never addresses that issue.
All right, just before we wrap up, I want to make a few brief announcements. You know, we've been talking about the war in Vietnam, like Vietnam was a war and not a country, with people that are still there alive today. And there's several efforts to assist the war in Vietnam, people in Vietnam, and I wanted to point out Dermot here, that you can talk to afterwards. He's involved in an effort to help build a wing on a hospital in Hanoi right now. And I also would ask you to talk to him afterwards, and also to look for these brochures out there, which are the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility Campaign we're promoting. Vietnamese victims of Agent Orange have launched a lawsuit against American chemical companies who made those weapons. And this is a problem that's going on in the third generation with birth defects. We owe it to them to assist them as well as fighting against this current war. So please come and see me on that. Tom Brinson back there with his hand up is the person organizing a chapter of Veterans for Peace. So if you're interested in joining up, see him. And I'd like to thank Stu Polliner, Bolsner, and the other folks that helped put on this program. Thanks.
If you'd like to hear a 30-second story to leave you with, when I left Fort Riley, Kansas, I left with the one-star General Bill Fulton, who was going over to Vietnam at the same time I was there to end the war, and he knew he had the troops to end it. He was hawkish, he vehemently believed in the war, and he was sure that this was very important for the United States. He came back, he alienated his 3 children who were against the war and moved away from his home. Nothing to do with him. His wife barely stayed with him. He just died about 3 or 4 months ago, close to 90 years of age. And one of the last things he told his wife, which she called to tell me, was before he died, one of the last things he said is, we had no right to be in Vietnam.
I'll give you more.